At 9:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning, February 14, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood at a podium in Ottawa and announced an $850 billion economic counterstrike that has sent absolute shockwaves through Wall Street, through the White House, and through every trading floor from New York to London to Tokyo. This wasn't a speech. This wasn't a negotiation. This was Canada declaring economic war on the United States in response to Donald Trump's tariff regime, and the weapon they just deployed is so devastating, so precisely calculated, that within 30 minutes of Carney's announcement, the Dow Jones dropped 1,147 points, the S&P 500 fell 6.2%, and the U.S. dollar weakened against every major currency, including the Canadian dollar, the euro, and the Japanese yen. This is the notification that Wall Street has been dreading for weeks. This is the moment that Trump's tariff war, the strategy he promised would make America stronger, has instead triggered the most severe economic retaliation in North American history. And the genius of Canada's counterstrike is that they're not targeting American consumers. They're not targeting American workers. They're targeting the one thing that Trump and his wealthy donors care about most: American corporate profits and shareholder value. In this deep dive, I'm going to walk you through exactly what Canada announced in that $850 billion package. I'm going to show you the three specific mechanisms Carney is using to devastate American companies without firing a single shot. I'm going to reveal the secret coordination between Canada, the European Union, and Mexico that makes this counterstrike impossible for Trump to stop. I'm going to expose the Wall Street panic that's happening right now as traders realize the U.S. just lost leverage it didn't even know it had. And I'm going to give you three scenarios for where this economic war goes next, including the nightmare scenario where the U.S. dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency within 18 months. Subscribe to join the community. Leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going, and share this video if it brought you value. Your support truly makes a difference. Let me get everyone on the same page because this moved incredibly fast, and the implications are staggering. 2 weeks ago, on February 1st, 2026, Donald Trump implemented his American Protection Tariff Act. Steel, aluminum, automotive parts, pharmaceuticals, electronics, all hit with tariffs ranging from 10% to 30%. Trump claimed this would force companies to manufacture in America, create millions of jobs, and restore American economic dominance. Canada's response at the time was measured. Prime Minister Carney said Canada would explore all options. He didn't threaten, he didn't escalate, he just said Canada would respond appropriately. That response came this morning at 9:17 a.m., and it's not what anyone expected. Carney didn't impose retaliatory tariffs. He didn't ban American products. He didn't close the border. Instead, he announced the North American Economic Sovereignty Act, an $850 billion package that fundamentally restructures how Canada does business with the world. And in the process, it destroys American corporate advantages that have existed for 75 years. Here's what the package includes, and pay close attention because each piece is designed to hit a different sector of the American economy. Mechanism 1, the Corporate Relocation Incentive Fund, $350 billion. This is the nuclear option. Canada is offering any Fortune 500 company that relocates headquarters from the United States to Canada a package that includes a 15-year corporate tax holiday, free land for factories and offices in designated economic zones, $10 million per relocated employee and infrastructure subsidies, and guaranteed access to Canada's 51 free trade agreements covering markets with over 1.5 billion consumers. Let me explain why this is devastating. American companies pay a federal corporate tax rate of 21%. Some states add another 5% to 10%. So a company like Apple or Microsoft is paying roughly 26% to 31% in total corporate taxes. Canada is offering 0% for 15 years. If Apple moved its headquarters to Toronto tomorrow, it would save approximately $23 billion per year in taxes. Over 15 years, that's $345 billion in savings. No company can ignore numbers like that. And Carney made it very clear in his speech this morning that the offers are real, the money is allocated, and Canada is ready to process applications immediately. Mechanism 2, the Strategic Resource Export Review, $200 billion. This is where Canada goes after American energy and materials. Canada supplies the United States with critical resources that American industries cannot function without. 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. 85% of U.S. electricity imports come from Canada. 90% of U.S. potash, which is essential for fertilizer and agriculture, comes from Canada. 100% of certain rare earth minerals that go into smartphones, electric vehicles, and military hardware come from Canadian mines. What Carney announced this morning is that Canada is creating a new Crown Corporation, a government-owned entity, that will control the export of all strategic resources. And here's the kicker, that Crown Corporation will prioritize sales to countries that maintain fair trade relationships with Canada. Translation, if you're the United States and you have tariffs on Canadian goods, you go to the back of the line. If you're the European Union or Japan or South Korea and you have free trade with Canada, you get priority access. This doesn't mean Canada is cutting off the U.S. entirely. That would violate trade agreements. But it means American companies will face delays, allocation limits, and price premiums. If a U.S. refinery and a German refinery both want Canadian crude, Germany gets it first. If a U.S. tech company and a Japanese manufacturer both need rare earth minerals, Japan gets them first. The market impact is immediate. Oil futures for U.S. delivery spiked 9% within 20 minutes of Carney's announcement. Natural gas futures jumped 12%. Agricultural commodity prices surged because traders know that if Canadian potash becomes harder to get, American farmers can't fertilize crops, yields drop, and food prices skyrocket. Mechanism 3, the North American Trade Diversification Initiative, $300 billion. This is Canada betting $300 billion that it can replace the United States as its primary trading partner within 5 years. Historically, about 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. That's always been Canada's vulnerability. The U.S. could threaten tariffs, and Canada had no choice but to negotiate because losing access to the American market would devastate the Canadian economy. But Carney is changing that calculation. The $300 billion fund is being used to build infrastructure specifically designed to trade with Europe and Asia instead of the United States. Canada is investing $80 billion in new Pacific ports in British Columbia to ship goods directly to China, Japan, and South Korea. They're spending $60 billion on Atlantic ports in Nova Scotia to ship to the European Union. They're allocating $40 billion for rail lines connecting Western Canadian oil fields to Pacific export terminals. They're putting $50 billion into Arctic shipping routes that will allow year-round exports to Europe via the Northwest Passage. And they're using $70 billion to subsidize Canadian companies that shift exports away from the U.S. and toward other markets. What this means is that within 3 to 5 years, Canada plans to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market from 75% to below 50%. And once that happens, American tariff threats become meaningless because Canada doesn't need the U.S. market anymore. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, because what I'm about to show you is the evidence that this was coordinated with other countries and that the United States is now facing a unified economic front. Receipt number 1, the EU coordination. Within 45 minutes of Carney's announcement, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, released a statement saying that the EU is prepared to expand trade with Canada and that European companies are very interested in the relocation incentives Canada is offering. That's not a coincidence. That's coordination. Sources tell us that Carney has been in talks with EU leadership for the past 3 weeks, and they've agreed on a joint strategy. Canada offers the relocation incentives. The EU offers tariff-free access to 27 European countries. Together, they create an alternative to the U.S. market that's actually bigger and more attractive. Receipt number 2, the Mexico alignment. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum released a statement at 10:05 a.m. saying that Mexico is reviewing similar measures and that Mexico stands with Canada in opposing unilateral tariff actions. Translation: Mexico is about to announce its own counterstrike package. If Mexico follows Canada's lead, the United States will be facing economic pressure from both its northern and southern neighbors simultaneously. The entire USMCA trade agreement, the deal Trump renegotiated in his first term, collapses. North American economic integration, which has been the foundation of U.S. manufacturing competitiveness for 30 years, disappears. Receipt number 3, the Wall Street panic. The market reaction tells you everything you need to know about who has leverage in this fight. Within 1 hour of Carney's speech, $2.3 trillion in market value was wiped out from U.S. stock exchanges. Energy stocks got destroyed because traders know that if Canada restricts oil and gas exports, U.S. energy companies can't meet demand and prices spike. Tech stocks collapsed because traders know that if rare earth minerals become harder to get, Apple, Tesla, and every other electronics manufacturer faces production delays. Agricultural stocks dropped because traders know that if potash supplies are restricted, American farming becomes less productive and less profitable. The market is screaming that Canada just flipped the script and the United States is now the vulnerable party. Receipt number 4, the currency move. The U.S. dollar weakened against the Canadian dollar for the first time in 18 months. For years, the Canadian dollar has been weaker than the U.S. dollar, which made Canadian exports cheaper and American exports more expensive. But this morning, within 90 minutes of Carney's announcement, the Canadian dollar strengthened by 3.2% against the U.S. dollar. Why? Because currency traders are betting that Canada's economy is about to boom with $850 billion in new investments, new trade deals, and an influx of American companies relocating to take advantage of the tax incentives. Meanwhile, they're betting the U.S. economy is about to suffer from resource restrictions, corporate flight, and collapsing trade relationships. Currency moves like this don't lie. The smart money is flowing out of the United States and into Canada. So why did Carney do this, and why is it so effective? We have to understand the strategy. Trump's tariffs were designed to hurt Canadian exporters by making their products more expensive in the U.S. market. Carney's counterstrike is designed to hurt American corporations by making it more profitable to leave the United States entirely. Trump is playing checkers. Carney is playing chess. Trump thought the U.S. market was so valuable that Canada would have no choice but to accept tariffs and negotiate from weakness. Carney is proving that Canada can build alternative markets, control critical resources, and poach American companies. And once those three things happen, the U.S. loses the leverage it's relied on for decades. The genius of Carney's plan is that it doesn't require Canada to win a trade war. It just requires Canada to survive long enough for American companies to make their own rational decisions. And those companies are running the numbers right now. If you're Ford or GM, do you stay in Michigan and pay 30% corporate taxes plus tariffs on imported parts? Or do you move to Ontario and pay zero taxes for 15 years? If you're an oil refinery in Texas, do you accept delays and price premiums on Canadian crude? Or do you build a new refinery in Alberta where you have guaranteed supply? The math is brutal, and it all points in one direction: leave America. Here's what's happening in Washington right now, and it's chaos. The White House has been completely blindsided. According to sources, Trump was in a meeting when news of Carney's announcement broke. He reportedly started screaming at his trade advisors, demanding to know why they didn't see this coming. He ordered his team to prepare an immediate response, but there's a problem. The United States doesn't have a good response. If Trump imposes more tariffs, he accelerates the corporate exodus. If he threatens to cut off trade with Canada entirely, he causes an energy crisis that crashes the U.S. economy. If he does nothing, he looks weak and Canada's strategy succeeds. He's trapped, and Carney knows it. At 11:30 a.m., the White House released a statement calling Canada's actions reckless and a betrayal of the North American partnership. But the statement offered no concrete retaliation, no specific policy response. That tells you the White House has no plan. They're improvising and they're losing. Congressional Republicans are in full panic mode. Senator Lindsey Graham called Carney's plan economic terrorism. Senator Tom Cotton demanded that the U.S. military secure critical supply lines. But behind the scenes, according to sources, Senate Republicans are furious at Trump. They know the tariffs caused this. They know Canada is retaliating because Trump gave them no choice. And they know that if this escalates, Republicans in energy states, manufacturing states, and agricultural states are going to get slaughtered in the 2026 midterms. Senator Mitch McConnell has reportedly told colleagues that Trump needs to back down immediately, repeal the tariffs, and negotiate a settlement before Canada's counterstrike permanently damages the U.S. economy. But Trump's ego won't let him admit he made a mistake, so McConnell is trying to figure out how to force Trump's hand without openly breaking with him. Let me give you 3 scenarios for where this goes. Scenario 1, the emergency negotiation. In this scenario, the economic pain becomes so severe so quickly that Trump has no choice but to negotiate. Within 72 hours, U.S. energy companies start screaming about supply disruptions. Within a week, tech companies start warning about production delays. Within 2 weeks, the stock market is down 15%, and Trump's poll numbers in swing states are collapsing. He calls Carney, they negotiate in secret, and they announce a deal. Trump repeals most of the tariffs, Carney suspends the resource export restrictions, and both sides claim victory. The corporate relocation incentives stay in place, so some companies still leave, but the crisis de-escalates. Scenario 2, the economic separation. In this scenario, Trump refuses to back down. Canada follows through on everything. Over the next 6 months, 20 major U.S. corporations relocate to Canada. Resource exports to the U.S. get restricted, causing energy prices to double. Canada successfully diverts 30% of its trade away from the U.S. and toward Europe and Asia. The U.S. and Canada effectively economically divorce. North American integration collapses. Both economies suffer in the short term, but Canada recovers faster because of the $850 billion investment package and new trade relationships. The U.S. enters a prolonged recession. Scenario 3, the dollar crisis. This is the nightmare scenario. As corporations flee, as resources become restricted, as trade relationships collapse, international confidence in the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar craters. Foreign governments and central banks that hold U.S. dollars and U.S. Treasury bonds start selling. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency comes into question. If that happens, borrowing costs for the U.S. government skyrocket, the national debt becomes unsustainable, and the American standard of living drops permanently. This scenario is unlikely, but it's no longer impossible. I'm watching 3 things. First, does any major U.S. company announce a relocation to Canada in the next 48 hours? If so, the floodgates open. Second, do U.S. energy prices spike next week? If Canadian oil and gas restrictions cause shortages, Trump faces immediate political pressure. Third, does the EU formally announce expanded trade with Canada? If Europe joins Canada's strategy, the U.S. is isolated. This is the biggest economic crisis of Trump's presidency, and it's entirely self-inflicted. Trump started a trade war he thought he would win. Canada just proved he won't. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is moving by the hour. The next 72 hours will determine whether the United States backtracks or whether we're watching the end of American economic dominance in real time.